You're listening to Release Your Resistance with Bex Beltran, episode 80. Welcome to Release Your Resistance. This is Bex. The only reason why any of us don't have what we want in life is because of our own resistance. Right now, I'm learning how to recognize and release my resistance, and this podcast tells you how you can release your resistance so that you can live the exact life that you want. Let's get started. A few weeks ago, I described my theories and experiences using massive action. I am pretty proud of that episode. I got some really great feedback from that episode, plus a request for a massive action notebook. So thanks to you if you were one of the people to share your enthusiasm, or if you told me the action that you have taken as a result of having listened to that episode. And as I think about that episode, I realize sometimes there is a piece that goes before massive action. Sometimes there is a prerequisite to taking massive action. Not all the time, but sometimes. And then, in an unrelated story, a few months ago, I was doing my morning journaling and I flipped over to a new page, and the prompt that was planted on that page for me was, what are your top 3 confident areas? And I'll just sidestep a little here and acknowledge that that question was actually kind of hard for me to answer that morning. I had to work through some of my own personal resistance about not feeling confident in hardly any areas that day. So that was an interesting thing to pay attention to. But once I got over my initial resistance of allowing myself to feel confident in some areas, and when I put my brain to work to discover what are my top 3 confident areas, I was delighted to discover that one of those confident areas that day was I take inspired and massive action. I am confident in this area because I know it's good for me. I know I have nothing to lose. I believe inspired action works. I know massive action leads to learning and growth. I like it. And inspired and massive action is so fun for me. So now I'm thinking it's about time for an episode about inspired action. I've already given you my take on massive action, so let's talk about inspired action. But first, intuitive nudges. Since I seem to be working in reverse, I will just mention I do also think that there is an element that comes before inspired action, and that is an intuitive nudge. An intuitive nudge for me is a little thought, a little piece of a sentence, a tiny slip of an idea that floats into my awareness and suggests something to me. Sometimes I go for it, and sometimes I dismiss it. Oftentimes, if I dismiss an intuitive nudge, I will learn why later that I got that intuitive nudge. Sometimes it's good news, sometimes it's bad news. And sometimes the intuitive nudge comes back repeatedly and more strongly until I do take action, which leads to inspired action. I define inspired action as when I take the first tiny or sometimes major step towards something without really understanding or needing to know why. It's when I take action without knowing a full intention or purpose. Sometimes I cannot even imagine what I think the outcome will be. I just know I'm doing this thing, whatever it is. And sometimes it's tiny and insignificant, seemingly in the present moment. Sometimes it could be an investment of my time or energy or money or something else. Sometimes it could be a risk. Sometimes it could be risk-free. Whatever it is, inspired action means taking an action from my inspiration, usually based on an intuitive nudge. Taking action of any kind can be met with resistance. When I think about taking inspired action, I realize Sometimes there's no resistance whatsoever. When I take these inspired actions, I am just doing it. There's no question. There's no reason not to. Even if I don't know why I am doing it, I am still doing it. Other times when I am inspired to take action and then I go for it, I do notice that there is some resistance. When I do have resistant thoughts, when I notice some fear or nervousness or warning alarms, they do not overpower the inspiration of this inspired action. It is just a force. Those resistant thoughts cannot overpower the force of the inspired action. So how do I feel when I am about to, or when I am in the midst of taking inspired action? I notice that I feel curious. Curiosity is probably the number one feeling. I'm probably wondering, what am I doing and why? Am I really doing this right now? What is this about? What is going on here? But I am still doing it. There's no question that I'm going to do it. I just really don't get why. And so I am curious about it. Sometimes, but less frequently, I'm excited. There is definitely a buzz or a vibration of excitement. But I probably don't experience the full emotion of excitement because I don't really know why I am doing what I'm doing, and I don't really have an expected outcome. There's not much to be excited about yet. I definitely feel open because there's no expected outcome, because I don't know why I'm doing what I'm doing, and because I don't know what is to come. Maybe a subliminal layered emotion under those three, curiosity, excitement, and openness, is knowing. What I don't feel when I am taking inspired action, when I'm taking other kinds of actions, I might feel resistant. When I'm taking action out of spite or out of fear or out of obligation, when I'm taking inspired action, I never feel ashamed. I do not feel guilty, and I don't feel afraid. There is a sense of out of control when I'm taking inspired action. I do feel a little bit out of control, but not in a manic, scary, or negative way. More likely, I'm thinking, this is happening, and I am doing this from a place of confidence and sureness and knowing. And I might also think, I cannot stop this. I couldn't stop it even if I wanted to. I don't know why I'm doing this. I don't know where this is going to lead. This doesn't make any sense, and I am still doing it. That's how it might feel a little out of control in that sense. And there's also sometimes a feeling of nervousness, like a nervous energy. But again, it's not a nervousness coming from fear or doubt. It's maybe just regular nerves, regular awareness that I am starting something that's a little unknown and a little unsure. But at the same time, I feel pretty sure. Not of the outcome, not at what's going to happen next, just sure that I am doing this. So hopefully with those descriptions that I've given you so far, you have an idea of what I'm talking about, and maybe you can even think back to a few examples from your personal life of when you have taken inspired action. And just in case you're wondering, I have some of my own examples to share with you. When I was a teenager, I had dropped out of college for a while. I was living my life and working and trying to figure out my next step. And one night, there was a problem with the electricity or maybe the phone or something in my apartment. And I decided I would just walk to the nearby college campus to use a payphone. There were so many other things that I could have done that night. I didn't need to go make that phone call. I could have waited till the electricity or the phone turned back on. There were other places I could have gone, like a convenience store or a grocery store within walking distance. But that night, there was just no question that I was going to the campus to find a phone and make a phone call. And when I got to the campus, I looked around, and even at night, I liked what I saw. I liked the grassy lawns. I liked the buildings. I liked the layout. I just felt so comfortable. And I just decided in that moment, after that walk to that payphone, I'm going to school here. This was after I had already started and dropped out of a different college the previous year. And suddenly, I made a spur-of-the-moment decision to enroll in school. The next weekday, I walked back to the campus, went into the admissions building, and got the paperwork to start the process. And that decision definitely turned my life around from that one inspired action of taking that one walk. Another example of taking inspired action was years later. I got the nudge, the intuitive hit, and also the external suggestion to buy a house, my first house. I was single. I had just started a brand new job within the previous month. I had just moved back into the Phoenix Valley. I was living with a friend, and I decided I'm going to buy a house. I don't even remember exactly the order of events or who I talked to, but basically I got a hold of a mortgage broker and started talking about what I would need to do to qualify for a loan. That first step got the ball rolling. That was the start of my personal real estate investment portfolio and basically supports my financial independence today. Here's another example of inspired action that happened that same year in 2001. But upon thinking about it, I'm wondering if there were other precursor inspired actions that I took years earlier, but only by looking backwards now am I able to connect the dots and see how one thing probably led to another. Here's the short version though. I decided to go out by myself one night to go to a club and go dancing because I like dancing and I like to go out. And a normal reaction, a non-inspired action for someone in my situation at that time might have been to stay home because I didn't have anyone to go with. Who goes out by herself to a club or a bar? That's just not done. That's just not how things work, right? You have to go with a group of girlfriends or at least one other friend or on a date or something like that. Maybe you'll meet someone there. You just don't show up alone to a club or a bar and just go to have a night out on the town. But I did. I did that multiple times whenever I couldn't find a friend to go with me, and I really wanted to go. And lucky for me, on this one specific Sunday night that I'm thinking of, I reconnected with someone who I had met the year before when I was out with a girlfriend, and we were having a girls' night out. But on this specific Sunday night that I decided to go out by myself, despite not having anyone to go with, despite not it being something that people do, this was the night that I ran into someone who I had met months earlier, and that person is now my husband. So I definitely consider going out that night instead of staying home inspired action. And a few years later, after a few years of marriage and a few more years of house purchases, I was flipping through an adult education catalog from our local community college, and something caught my eye about a solar course, a course about the energy supply in Arizona and using solar energy. I don't even remember the exact title or topic of the course, but something about it caught my eye and I thought, oh, I am going to that course. It was very interesting. It was just a one-night class and I went to it and I loved the information that was shared. The instructor was so knowledgeable and such an expert and shared the information so easily, and I got super interested in the topic and I wanted to know more. And at the end of the class, the instructor gave us ideas for other resources if we wanted to learn more or get more involved. One of the things that he suggested was a solar meetup group, and he gave us the group's website. My inspired action of flipping through that catalog and seeing that class and then deciding to enroll for the class and going and showing up that night for that class and then listening to the instructor and hearing him talk about how to get more information led to the solar group's website. Their website led me to their meeting platform that they use to announce their meetings and their classes and their tours and things that the solar group was doing. And it was on a site called meetup.com. So I ended up joining Meetup so that I could get the announcements from the solar group. And Meetup led me to a complete overhaul of my social life and my friend group and how I spent my free time. I have had so many other positive and life-changing outcomes as a result of checking out how to get notified of the solar group's upcoming events, which I learned about by going to that one solar class that one night at the community college. And ironically, I still haven't ended up getting solar on my own house, which at the time I thought might be the reason that I was interested in that topic that night. But I have had so many fun, non-solar related experiences and met so many wonderful people and made friends for life and had plenty of things to do when I was bored, and I have learned so much. I am so grateful for that solar meetup group even though I haven't followed them in years. And here is a more recent example of an intuitive nudge and taking inspired action. A few weeks ago, I was scrolling around social media and I saw that a woman, a stranger on the internet, had posted a request for anyone available to dog sit for her starting the next day. My thought was, that's kind of crazy. I like to plan things in advance. I like to know all the answers up front. I like to have things figured out. I thought, why would someone ask for a week-long dog sit the day before the trip? But something about it just called out to me, and I responded to the post, and I messaged the woman, and we had a back and forth, and we started texting each other, and wouldn't you know, at 6 a.m. the next morning, the dog got dropped off at my house and spent the next week with me. And we had so much fun, and it was such a great experience, and I love that I got to have that friendly, fun, constant companion for that week, and that I got to help someone out who was in a tight spot. It just worked out all the way around. And there was a little resistance for me in that last example. The whole time that we were setting up the drop-off for the next day, I was thinking thoughts like, is this a scam? This is a stranger on the internet. Is this really happening? Is my husband going to be okay with me bringing the stranger's dog into our home? What is going on? Am I even a dog sitter? I was having so many resistant thoughts, but I was powerless to stop. It was just flowing and unfolding, and I am so glad it did. So those are just some of the both major and minor examples of how inspired action has shown up for me in my life. Now that I've shared these examples, I am really curious if you can think of ways that you have taken inspired action that has maybe led to some massive action for you. Maybe your inspired action led you to coming up with a strategy and a plan and a goal for yourself. Or maybe it led to a new, unexpected opportunity that you could never have imagined. Or has your inspired action led to a great experience or a life partner? I am so curious about how it shows up. How do we recognize it? What happens when we don't follow through? What happens when we do follow through? I just want to know everything about inspired action. And if you are now curious and interested in the idea of inspired action, I have 3 suggestions for myself and for you if you want to play along. The first suggestion is to be on the lookout for intuitive nudges. I am sure we have all had them. I have had these nudges where I get a do this, call, respond, go there. But sometimes resistance might pop up and say, no, you don't want to do that. You're not a dog sitter. You shouldn't go to a bar by yourself. Wait until you have a friend to go with. So let's be on the lookout for these intuitive nudges. And as they come up, consider taking inspired action. What would be the next step, the first step, the tiniest little step that you could take? Would it be aligning? Would it feel good? Would you feel curious? Would you feel excited? Would you be open? Would you feel powerless to stop and turn around and not do it? My second suggestion of a way that you could play with inspired action is to consider and think about the great things that you have in your life right now. What is so perfect about your life? What is so amazing about what you have done and created and achieved? Take some time to backtrack and reverse engineer to figure out what was the inspired action that caused this really flowy or perfectly unfolded or resistance-free situation to come into existence. What was the very first step that you took, the very first action that you did that eventually led to what you have now? So back to the story about how I reconnected with my future husband that one Sunday night when I had just decided to go out by myself. When I told you the short version, I implied that there were some previous examples of inspired action. So here is the prologue of that story. I don't think the inspired action of that particular Sunday night would have been as resistance-free and flowy as it was if I wasn't already in the practice of going out and doing things on my own. That habit or willingness started years earlier, years before that Sunday night when I decided, oh, who cares that no one's available to go with me? I'll just go by myself. Before that, for years, I had been going to movies by myself, going out to eat by myself, taking vacations by myself. I did not have any problem going out and doing those things by myself when someone else my age or in my situation might have felt less comfortable doing that. So now I'm thinking, I wonder if the real, true, inspired action initially happened years earlier. The time that I'm specifically thinking of that could have been the original inspired action is when I had a trip planned to go to Euro Disney with a friend when I was in high school. I was a senior in high school. It was prom weekend. I had decided not to go to my senior prom, and instead, because we were in Germany and it was very accessible, a friend and I decided we would just take a bus trip and go to Euro Disney. It was just a few hours overnight. And then we could spend the whole day at Disneyland and then come back the next night. So we set it up. We had it all planned. On the day of the trip, my friend told me she wasn't coming. So then I thought, okay, what now? What do I do now? Do I go on this trip that I've planned and paid for as my replacement for prom? Or do I stay home or figure out something else? And I decided to go to Disneyland. So I ended up taking a bus from Germany to Euro Disney by myself, and I had a great time. And now I'm wondering if that inspired action of going on that trip alone and doing what is normally a group activity all by myself as a teenager helped pave the way for future solo experiences of going to movies by myself and going out to restaurants by myself, which then paved the way for, oh, I am going out dancing by myself tonight. And that decision and action caused me to randomly run into my future life partner. Reverse engineer some of those perfectly unfolded resistance-free situations in your life and look for what was the original inspired action that you took. Then figure out if you can replicate that inspired action in other ways in your current present day. My third suggestion is one that I haven't tried for myself yet, but now I'm curious. So this is a suggestion for me as well as for you. I want to get curious about other people. I want to listen for their examples of inspired action. And again, consider their examples as maybe like a template or as an option to see how I could use those elements of their example of inspired action in my own present day, in my own situation. Paying attention to how inspired action happens can help us get more familiar and strengthen this muscle of following the intuitive nudge and then taking action on it. Maybe it will lead to something, maybe not. Maybe the next step after taking that inspired action will be coming up with a massive action plan. Maybe something completely unexpected will happen. Who knows? It doesn't matter. It's just a fun thing to do. So now I am curious to hear from you. Have you taken any inspired action recently? What was it? I want to know. I am so curious. If you are an inspired action taker, what am I missing or misunderstanding or not explaining fully in my examples or my explanation of the value of inspired action? And finally, as always, let's do a resistance check. Do you have any resistance to hearing about inspired action? Or have you noticed any resistance to taking inspired action of your own? How does that show up? Why do you think the resistance shows up stronger than the powerlessness not to take that inspired action? What is going on there? I want to hear all about it. Send me an email at hi@bexb.org or leave me a comment in the show notes for this episode at bexb.org/inspired, INSPIRED. And if you want to track your intuitive nudges, I have a notebook for that. Of course I do. Just go to my shop at bexb.org/quick shop and scroll through the notebook covers and look for the one that says intuition on the front. It's pink and it has some designs on the front and it has the big word in gold, bold, intuition. Check that notebook out and see if that would work for you. Other than that, thank you so much for listening today. Talk to you next Friday. This has been Release Your Resistance. Thank you for listening. If you like this podcast, make sure you're subscribed and leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Also, think about someone who you know who would love this episode and share it with them. There should be a share button on your app if you're listening to this on your phone. If you'd like to continue this conversation one-on-one or in real time, come visit me on my site at beckspeed.org to see how we can work together.